Hollow Creek, Wyoming Territory, August 1886. Heat pressed down on the yard until the air wavered above the planks like a fever. Dust clung to boots and lips, carrying the bitter taste of a dry summer. The auction bell clanged once, sharp enough to pull every head toward the platform. Behind a flaked red gate stood a line of women with rope at their wrists, more for show than strength. Mercy stood among them, sturdy and broad-armed, her dirt-streaked cream dress tight across the shoulders and loose at the waist. A strip of faded gingham tied off the end of her braid. The boards under her boots were hot, but she planted her feet hard enough to feel the grain bite through the worn soles. She lifted her eyes once, just enough to catch the far line of the horizon before bringing them down again. The auctioneer's voice carried over the stillness. "Next up, good kitchen hands on her. Strong as two of you put together." His words pulled a thin, mean laugh from somewhere in the crowd. "Start at $1. No answer. A horse stomped behind the livery. 80 cents, he tried. 60 then. She'll pay for herself by winter. From the right, a voice cut in. "You paying us to take her?" Laughter broke again, sharper this time. At the back rail stood a wiry man in a sun-bleached hat. He wasn't the tallest in the yard, but there was a steadiness in the way he stood that drew the eye. Narrow shoulders, long arms, and a lean frame marked him as someone who worked hard without wasted motion. A faint limp in his left leg showed when he shifted his stance. He watched the platform with the calm of someone used to weighing a thing before acting. The rope at Mercy's wrists shifted, and she steadied herself with the smallest pull of her arms. The man raised one hand. The laughter faded into silence. The auctioneer blinked. "You bidding, sir?" A single nod. 60 cents. Sold. The gate swung open. Heat came up from the yard in a wave. The man stepped forward, drawing a small knife from his pocket. One quick cut, and the rope fell away. He set it on the post like it was something that had no business on a person. "You need anything from back there?" he asked. Her voice stayed even. "No." "Wagons this way." They walked through the press of bodies. A voice muttered, "Could have had the redhead." Another said, "Fat one'll eat him poor." Mercy's cheeks flushed, but her stride didn't falter. The man's boots tapped steady on the boards, and he didn't look at either speaker. At the wagon, he took the rail in one hand and waited for her to climb. She did, settling on the bench. He stepped up beside her, reins in hand, and the team leaned into the traces. The bell clanged again behind them, but they were already rolling past the last hitching post, heading into the pale stretch of road where heat shimmered and the land opened wide. The wagon creaked along the rutted road, wheels biting into hard-packed dirt. Grass on either side lay flat from wind, and the air carried the dry scent of sage. Mercy sat upright, hands folded in her lap, watching the land roll past in shades of gold and brown. Beside her, Jonas kept his lean frame steady on the bench, one hand light on the reins, the other resting on his thigh. The brim of his hat cut a shadow across his angular face. His shoulders were narrow, his build wiry, the muscles in his forearms moving with the slow rhythm of a man who worked without waste. A faint hitch in his left leg showed each time he braced his boots against a rut. They'd been riding nearly a mile before Mercy spoke. "You didn't ask my name. Didn't figure it mattered until you felt like giving it." His voice was quiet, matter of fact. "It's Mercy," she said. Jonas gave a single nod. "All right then." They passed a pair of crows on a fence post. The birds lifted into the air, wings black against the washed-out sky. Mercy's gaze followed them until they were small against the horizon. "You from here?" she asked. "Close enough. Been on that land since I could carry a post-hole digger." The road narrowed into a shallow cut between ridges, then opened again. Off to the left, a weathered house leaned slightly westward, boards silvered with age. A barn stood nearby, its roof patched in places, a corral running along one side. Jonas pulled the team to a slow halt beside the porch. 2 rooms, one's yours. Cook if you want. Rest if you don't. I won't make you do either. Mercy stayed seated for a breath, looking from the barn to the house. I didn't buy you, Mercy, he said, turning toward her. I saved you. You didn't flinch when they mocked you, not when they priced you like cattle. Figured you'd rather bite than beg. The words settled between them. Mercy gave a single nod and stepped down. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine soap and wood ash. Jonas led her to a small room at the end of a short hall. A narrow bed sat against the wall, covered with a folded quilt. A basin of water stood ready on the washstand. There's a bolt on the inside, he said, if it helps you sleep. Mercy's eyes moved over the room, the clean floorboards, the east-facing window, the light falling soft through the glass. Supplies come in twice a month, Jonas added. We'll go into town in a few days. You can choose what you need. Her hand rested lightly on the doorframe. She didn't answer, but she looked at him once, long enough for the meaning to pass without words. Jonas tipped his hat and stepped back down the hall, the slow rhythm of his boots fading toward the front room. The first light of dawn slipped in through the east window, pale and cool. Mercy was already up, her hair pulled back tight, the braid falling down her back. The house was quiet except for the faint groan of the porch boards in the wind. In the kitchen, she found a half sack of flour against the wall, a tin of salt and a crock of bacon grease. She worked without sound, measuring and cutting the dough, setting rough rounds into the heat of the stove. The scent of baking rose slow, warm, and steady. Jonas came in from the yard, brushing the cold air off his shoulders. His frame was lean under the faded shirt, the muscles in his forearms standing out as he pulled off his gloves. The limp in his left leg was more pronounced this early, but it didn't slow him. You made these? He asked, nodding at the biscuits. Mercy gave a single nod. He sat at the table, took one, and bit into it. Chewed slow. Best I've had in years. He didn't say more, but his eyes stayed on her a moment longer before dropping to his plate. Later, he handed her a slip of paper. The handwriting was neat, slanted. Supplies from town. I was headed there. You can come along if you like. Mercy studied the paper, then gave a single nod. All right. He slipped the list back into her hand. We'll take the wagon in when it suits. 2 mornings later, the sun rose behind a pale veil of clouds, the air carrying the hint of rain, though the ground was still hard and dry. Jonas was at the wagon, checking the harness. His wiry frame moved with the efficiency of someone who didn't waste effort. Narrow shoulders bent to his work, long arms looping leather through buckles. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself with a steadiness that filled the space around him. They rode into Hollow Creek in silence, the road lined with brittle grass leaning in the wind. When they reached the main street, heads turned. Jonas stopped the wagon outside the freight office to speak with Earl Gibbons, a neighboring rancher. Mercy stayed seated, parcel list folded in her hand. The 2 men stood a few paces away, low voices blending with the rattle of a passing cart. Earl was a head taller, looking down at Jonas like he was measuring him. You ever decide you don't want her? Earl said. I've got a hand who could work her keep. Trade you a pair of good mules. Jonas's answer came without hesitation. Not happening. She'd be better off. Jonas cut him short. She's not up for trade. Not now. Not ever. The conversation ended there. Earl gave a short, awkward nod and stepped back. Jonas returned to the wagon without looking back, his stride even and unhurried. Freight office? Mercy asked. Done, Jonas said, climbing up. His tone didn't invite questions. Inside the general store, Mercy moved along the shelves, choosing items with quiet precision. Near the bolts of fabric, two women leaned together. "That's her," one said softly. The other smirked. "Didn't cost him much. Doubt she'll last long at his table." Mercy's hands didn't falter. She took her thread and moved past them without a glance, setting her choices on the counter. Sadie Miller's gaze was sharp as she tallied the total. "Jonas treating you decent?" "Well, as can be," Mercy said. Sadie's brows lifted. "Figure he don't complain about a woman who eats hearty." Mercy's reply was even. "I put back what I take out, and I've never taken what wasn't mine." Sadie blinked. Mercy paid and left without another word. That evening she found Jonas on the porch with a cup of coffee, the wind stirring the grass beyond the fence. "They say something?" he asked. "They always do." "Doesn't mean you have to answer." "I didn't," she said, lowering herself into the chair beside him. He studied her for a moment. "They're wrong about you." Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "You've got more backbone than most men I've met," he said. "You don't stomp or shout. You just hold steady." She glanced at him, the faintest shift in her mouth. "I don't need flattery." "It ain't flattery, it's truth." The wind moved through the wheat, and neither of them went inside. Autumn came slow to Hollow Creek, the nights cooling first, then the mornings, until a thin frost began to lace the porch rail before dawn. Mercy moved through her days with quiet certainty, feeding the hens, patching shirts, hanging laundry on the line so it swayed in the wind like a row of pale flags. Jonas didn't hover. He let her set her own pace, but in small ways, he began to trust her with more of the ranch, letting her tally grain for the feed shed, close the barn at night, check fence lines with him. One afternoon they rode along the west fence. Jonas paused to test a loose post, his long fingers pressing into the weathered wood. His frame was lean, his stance careful because of the limp, but his movements were steady. "You've got good eyes," he said. "Spotted that break before I did." Mercy shrugged. "You learn to see things before they give way." That night over supper, she asked about the limp. "Horse went over on me when I was 20, he said. "Bone healed crooked. Kept me out of the cavalry. Kept me here." "Could have been worse," she said. "Was worse for the horse," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. One morning, Mercy opened a trunk tucked in the corner of the cabin. Inside lay a pale blue bonnet and a neatly folded blue calico dress. Both were worn but clean, faintly scented with cedar. "They belonged to someone?" she asked softly when Jonas came in from the yard. Jonas's gaze settled on the trunk. "Aye, my sister's. She died young. I couldn't bring myself to throw them out." Mercy brushed the fabric between her fingers. "And now?" "Now they're yours," he said simply. "If you'll have them." Mercy wore the dress that morning, smoothing the fabric once before stepping out onto the porch, the bonnet tied neat under her chin. The ride into Hollow Creek was quiet, the kind that had become familiar. The same stairs met them, but Mercy walked with her chin level, her steps unbroken. After they returned, she lingered by the wagon as Jonas began to unhitch the team. "You know," he said without looking up, "you're free to go if you want." She turned toward him. "You brought me here, bought me for 60 cents. And now you're saying I can leave?" "I bought your dignity back from that yard," Jonas said. "Not your life." Her hand rested on the wagon rail. "I ain't going anywhere, not tonight." Jonas nodded once, the gesture small but certain, then led the horses toward the corral. The morning sky hung low and gray, the kind that promised rain without hurry. Jonas was out on the porch, planing the edge of a warped door, his narrow shoulders working in steady rhythm. The rasp of the tool carried across the yard. Reverend Pike's wagon rolled up the lane, the wheels crunching over frost-hardened dirt. The preacher stepped down, tucking his gloves into his coat pocket. "Morning, Jonas," he said. "Morning." Pike's gaze shifted toward the chicken yard, where Mercy was scattering grain. She glanced up briefly, offered a nod, and went back to her work. "She seems quiet," the preacher remarked. Jonas's eyes followed her. "She is." "Quiet women make good wives," Pike said, his voice measured as if testing the thought. Jonas didn't answer, and the preacher moved on to discuss fence repairs before taking his leave. The wagon creaked away down the lane, leaving only the wind moving through the grass. Jonas set the door aside and stepped down into the yard. Mercy was at the wash basin, sleeves rolled, the muscles in her forearms taut as she wrung out a cloth. "Will you take me?" he asked. She narrowed her eyes. "As what?" "As a husband." The breeze shifted, bringing the smell of wood smoke from the chimney. "I ain't pretty," she said flatly. "I didn't ask for pretty. I ain't gentle. You're strong where it counts." Her eyes lingered on him. "You sure?" "Folks'll talk. You'll be the man who married the woman they mocked." Jonas stepped closer, his lean frame casting a long shadow across the packed dirt. "I'm already the man who paid 60 cents for you in front of half the county," he said. "They've said their worst, but I'll be the man who chose you too." Her voice was quiet but steady. "You sure?" Jonas's gaze held hers. "The preacher said quiet women make good wives. Maybe so. But you're more than quiet. You've got a steadiness most folks don't. You don't bend when they press. That's worth more to me than anything they'll ever say." Mercy's fingers tightened on the damp cloth. "I want a place I don't have to flinch in." "You've got it," Jonas said. They stood there a long moment, the space between them narrowing but unhurried. The first drops of rain spotted the ground, and neither moved away. The storm came in fast from the west, dark clouds pushing over the prairie like a moving wall. By sundown, the wind was sharp enough to rattle the shutters and lift grit from the yard. Jonas had spent the day repairing the west fence, and his shoulder ached enough that he'd let Mercy send him inside for supper. But Mercy never liked leaving the hens unchecked. Lantern in hand, she stepped out into the wind, skirts pulling at her legs, braid loosening strand by strand. That was when she caught it. The smell. Sharp. Wild. Not stove smoke. She turned toward the barn just as lightning split the sky, lighting the world in white. Flames were crawling up the side of the haystack beside the stall wall. In the gust, they leapt higher. The lantern slipped from her hand into the dirt. She ran. From the house came the slam of the front door. Jonas appeared, bareheaded, his lean frame cutting through the wind, boots half pulled on. One hand clutched a bucket, the other braced against his bad shoulder. "Get back," he shouted. "Roof goes, it'll take you with it. I'm not leaving the horses. You'll burn with them if you stay." She didn't answer. She threw her weight against the side stall door until the wood groaned and gave. Inside, a mare reared, eyes wide, nostrils flaring in the smoke. Mercy untied her rope, slapped her flank, sent her bolting into the storm. Jonas was beside her now, his wiry frame moving with fast precision, throwing water onto the flames, hacking at the dry beams with a shovel. Another stall. A gelding, panicked, hooves striking the floor. Mercy grabbed the halter and hauled him toward the open air. "Mercy!" Jonas's voice cut through the roar. "I've got him!" They'd barely cleared the doorway when the first beam cracked and fell. Jonas lunged, shoving her into the dirt as the fire roared inches behind them. The heat slapped her back, even through the blanket of rain. "You fool," he rasped. "You should have run." "I wasn't about to let your horses die," she coughed. "I don't run from things." "No," he said, holding her there. "You don't." The barn groaned one last time and collapsed, sparks twisting up into the rain-heavy air. Later, Jonas sat her on the porch with a blanket over her shoulders. Her face was streaked with soot, her lips dry from heat. He brought a damp cloth and knelt, pressing it gently to her forehead. "I thought I'd lost you in there," he said. "I was scared," she admitted. "But I didn't stop." "No," he said quietly. "You never do." Her hands trembled under the blanket, and she curled them in the wool to hide it. Jonas noticed anyway. His eyes softened, but he didn't speak of it. "Why'd you come for me?" she asked. "You could have saved the roof, the tools, but you came for me." "I'm not about to bury another woman who gave me back my life," he said. She looked at him stunned. "You don't even know what I am to you." "I do," Jonas said. "Maybe not in words, but I know what you are." Her voice was low. "And what's that?" He cupped her face in his calloused hand. "You're the reason this house doesn't echo anymore. You're not a burden, Mercy. You're here. Steady, real, warm. Everything this land forgets to give." Her breath caught. "I didn't marry you that day at the auction," Jonas said. "But I think I started loving you then. And every time you stood your ground or didn't flinch when folks spat your name, I loved you a little more." Her tears came silent. "If you'll have me," he said, voice rough from smoke, "I'd like to make that official." She gave a broken laugh. "I ain't wearing white. I don't care what you wear. I snore. So do I. Might be we'll keep each other awake." She leaned forward and kissed his forehead, smoky and damp. "You're not perfect," she whispered. "Neither are you. But I think we could be enough," she said. His smile was crooked and tired, but whole. They were married 2 mornings later in the kitchen, the gray light of early day falling across the table. Reverend Pike stood between the stove and the window, Bible open in his weathered hands. Mercy wore her work dress, sleeves rolled, hands dusted with flour from the biscuits she'd started before dawn. Jonas stood across from her, his wiry frame steady, narrow shoulders squared with quiet certainty. The vows were spoken plainly, without flourish. "You meant every word?" Reverend Pike asked when it was done. "I meant every last one," Jonas said. Mercy didn't speak, but she didn't look away from him either. Her stillness was its own kind of answer. Jonas stepped closer, his hand brushing the side of her face. She didn't wait for him to speak. They met halfway, the kiss steady and sure, not for show, but for the keeping. In the warm hush of the kitchen, it felt like something quietly sealed, something that would hold. Reverend Pike closed his Bible and gave a small nod. "Well then, I'll call it done." By the time they reached Hollow Creek that afternoon, word had already passed down Main Street. Some turned their backs as they drove in. Others whispered behind their hands. One man spat in the dust near the wagon wheel, but kept his eyes lowered. They stopped at the general store. Jonas stepped down first, then offered his hand to help her. She took it without hesitation. Inside, the room felt quieter than it should have. Sadie Miller stood behind the counter, her lips pressed thin. "We need flour, sugar, and that honey you keep behind the spice rack," Jonas said. "You don't need all that," Sadie replied, her gaze sliding toward Mercy. "She'll eat you out of house and home." Jonas didn't blink. "If I keep her fed, she won't have to bite back at folks who forget their manners." Gasps rose from the back of the store. One chuckle, low and quick, broke the silence. Sadie's face flushed dark, but she said nothing more. They packed the supplies in the wagon. Jonas's jaw set hard as they tied the last sack in place. Mercy watched him, seeing the fine lines at the corner of his eyes tighten. He wasn't ashamed. She knew that. He was burning at the smallness of people who thought they could shrink her. They were halfway to the end of the street when a voice came from the saloon steps. "Hey, Cowboy," the man drawled, leaning against a post with a clean beer glass in hand. "That the same one you bought at auction? Figured you'd have traded up by now." Mercy froze. Jonas turned slowly, his lean, shorter frame straightening, eyes locking on the man. "Say that again." The man straightened, smirk faltering. "I said—" He didn't finish. Jonas was already walking. Not fast, not loud, just final. The heckler's grin carried a flicker of doubt now, maybe because Jonas stood a head shorter and looked slighter than most cowhands on the street. But the fist landed clean and hard in his gut, folding him over and sending the glass shattering in the dust. "You open your mouth about her again," Jonas said, his voice carrying clear, "and I'll close it for good." No one moved. The man wheezed on the ground, his friends stepping back without a word. Jonas dusted his hands and returned to the wagon. "Too much?" he asked as he took the reins. Mercy raised one brow. "Felt just right." The team pulled them out of town to the sound of silence. No laughter now, just the creak of harness leather and the steady beat of hooves. The prairie opened wide as Hollow Creek faded behind them, the late light turning the wheat fields into slow-moving rivers of gold. The air was cool now, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and wood smoke from somewhere far off. Mercy sat beside Jonas, her hands folded in her lap, watching the horizon draw long shadows across the land. Jonas held the reins loose but steady, his wiry frame leaning into the sway of the wagon. Neither spoke until the ranch house came into view, leaning slightly west as it always had, the porch rail catching the last fire of the day. Inside, they unpacked the supplies in an easy rhythm, her setting flour and sugar on the shelf, him fixing the stubborn hinge on the smokehouse door. The quiet between them wasn't empty. It was the steady hum of two people working in step. When the sun dropped, they took their coffee outside. The porch boards creaked under their weight as they settled into the bench. The air was crisp now, and the wheat beyond the fence moved in slow, whispering waves. Jonas stared out toward the darkening fields. "You ever think twice about it?" Mercy turned her head. "About what?" "Letting folks see, letting them know you stayed." Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. "You know what they saw the day you walked me out of that yard?" He waited. "They saw a woman who didn't beg, and a man who didn't flinch. That unsettles people, makes them look at their own lives harder than they want to." Jonas's gaze stayed on her. "They're still unsettled, but they don't laugh anymore." She was quiet a moment. "You never asked me why I stayed. I'm asking now." She looked out over the fields, the wheat catching the last glint of starlight before night claimed it. "Because this is the first place I've ever been more than a burden." He nodded slowly. "You're more than that to me." She reached for his hand, her grip firm. "I know." The bench held steady beneath them, the night wind brushing past the wheat like a whisper. Stars began to lift out of the dark one by one. They sat side by side, hands joined, the silence between them carrying more weight than words, not waiting for the world's approval, but knowing they'd built their own place in it.